Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The room smelled of coffee, gun oil, and tension. Veterans leaned back in their chairs, trading quiet jokes, their confidence filling every corner of the room. And then there was Sarah Mitchell, 22 years old, the youngest in the program, the only one still fumbling with her pen as if it might anchor her in a place where she clearly didn't belong. Or at least, that's what the others thought. No one said it aloud, but she heard it in the silence. The subtle way conversation skipped over her. The half-hidden smirks when her hand went up too quickly during ballistics theory. Rookie, farm girl, diversity hire. She caught those words in whispers. They stung more than the weight of the M24 rifle they'd shoved into her arms on day one. But what no one in that room knew, not yet, was that Sarah had been carrying something heavier her entire life: doubt. She had grown up in a quiet Montana town, where silence stretched across open fields, and the only things that broke it were her grandfather's old Winchester cracking through the air and the slow exhale of breath before pulling a trigger. Rabbits, deer, the occasional coyote, that was her world. But here, in the elite sniper program, the rules were different. The stakes weren't about food on the table. They were about lives saved or lost in a breath. Sergeant Major, the man everyone whispered about, made sure they never forgot that. He walked into that first training session with the weight of 3 tours in Afghanistan carved into the lines of his face. He'd seen the world through a scope more times than anyone dared count. His reputation was legend, one of the longest confirmed kills in history. And Sarah, to him, she looked like someone who should have been sitting in a lecture hall, not a hide, rifle in hand. He didn't hide his skepticism. The M24 sniper system weighed nearly 17 pounds when fully loaded. Sarah's arms shook after holding it too long, her muscles burning, her breath coming harder than she wanted anyone to notice. Around her, the others seemed born to it. They looked like stone statues behind the scope, while she trembled, fingers raw from dragging the bolt again and again. And yet in the classroom, things shifted. Sarah absorbed the science of ballistics as if she had been waiting her whole life to understand it. She flew through calculations of wind drift, air density, range estimation. Equations that made the others groan under their breath came alive for her. She didn't just memorize them, she understood them. Numbers were her quiet refuge, but numbers alone couldn't steady a rifle. Numbers couldn't silence the laughter behind her back at chow when someone muttered, "She won't last." At night, staring up at the barracks ceiling, Sarah tried to push the voices out, but another voice always came back. Her grandfather: "Trust your training, trust your instincts. Remember, every expert was once a beginner." Still, doubt had a way of creeping in when you were alone in the dark. The training was designed to break them. That much was obvious. Weeks turned into months, endless hours in hides covered in mud, bug bites stinging, bodies aching. The others joked their way through it. Sarah didn't. She studied. She meditated. She whispered ballistics tables under her breath until they became part of her bloodstream. While the others drank on weekends, she ran laps in the rain. While they laughed off near misses, she punished herself for every shot that landed an inch off center. The turning point came in the 4th month. 18 hours. That was the test. No food, no comfort, no stretch breaks. Camouflaged in a hide, they had to remain invisible, unmoving, engaging targets across shifting ranges and conditions. Veterans cracked under the pressure, muscles cramping, eyes blurring. One candidate broke discipline and shifted too much, giving away his hide. He was done. Sarah didn't break. Her size, once mocked, became her strength. She fit into the cramped hide like she had been carved for it. Her patience, built on years of waiting in Montana fields for deer that never showed, became her edge. Every minute was a test of silence, stillness, and discipline. By the end of it, her clothes were soaked with sweat, but her eyes were steady, her breathing calm. "Noticed?" He didn't say anything, but his eyes lingered longer on her after that. He recognized something, that mix of patience and calculation that turned shooters into snipers. But she didn't know that, not yet. As graduation neared, the tension in the compound thickened. Only the best would move forward. Everyone else would fade back into the anonymity of the infantry. Sarah was still seen as an outsider. Her progress didn't erase the whispers. If anything, it sharpened them. She's overcompensating. She studies too much. She's not built for this. And then came the announcement of the final qualification exercise. 5 stations, ranging from 300 to 1,200 meters, wind, elevation, shifting conditions, and time pressure. Each station designed to expose weakness. The final position, though position 5, was labeled simply, Special Challenge, no details, only knew what it was. The night before, Sarah barely slept. She replayed every lesson, every drill, every whispered piece of advice from her grandfather. Doubt and determination waged war inside her chest. At dawn, fog rolled in thick, blinding the range to less than 50 meters. Most drills would have been postponed, but not this one. Made it clear, combat didn't wait for perfect weather. Sarah's stomach twisted as she stood in line, rifle slung across her chest, waiting her turn. She had drawn a middle slot, not first, not last. That meant time. Time to listen to gunfire echo through the fog. Time to wonder if the others were succeeding, failing, or crumbling under the weight of the unknown. When her name was called, Sarah's legs felt like stone. She walked to the first position, 300 meters. The fog clung thick to the ground, shapes barely visible through her scope. She adjusted carefully, waiting for windows of clarity, refusing to rush. Her first 3 shots landed center mass. Her breath steadied. 500 meters, moving targets, a harder test. The numbers spun through her head, lead angles, drift, correction factors. She squeezed the trigger. 4 out of 5 found their mark. 800 meters, concealed targets, some real, some decoys. She scanned, patient. Too patient, some would say, but patience was her weapon. She identified every true target, refused every trap, all confirmed. His face gave nothing away, but his pen scratched quietly across his clipboard. 1,200 meters, the edge of normal training range, wind shifting across the mountains. Sarah adjusted, exhaled, fired. The first shot was off, not by much but enough to sting. She forced herself to pause, to breathe again. The second shot found center. The third confirmed it. And then came position 5. A steep climb. Her body screamed, lungs burning, arms heavy from the rifle on her back. But when she crested the ridge and saw the setup, her breath froze. 5,000 meters, over 3 miles. A target so distant it looked like a speck, barely visible even at full magnification. It wasn't meant to be possible. Sarah lowered herself into the dirt, heart pounding. Every calculation she knew seemed too small, too fragile against the vastness of the shot. Air density, temperature shifts, the rotation of the earth, all of it mattered now. Leaned in close, voice low, calm. This isn't pass or fail. It's a measure of how far you've come. Show me what you see. The others had already tried. Most failed. Some hit close. None had come near perfect. Sarah knew she wasn't expected to, but expectations had never defined her. She settled in. The rifle was no longer unfamiliar. It was an extension of her body, her breath, her will. She watched the grass bend in the wind miles away, traced the shimmer of heat rising from the valley, ran the math until the numbers steadied her nerves. Her grandfather's voice echoed again. Don't rush the shot, Sarah. The animal will wait. Be ready when you are. She adjusted, breathed, waited for the pause, and slowly, gently pulled the trigger. The bullet was already gone. 6 seconds in flight. That's what the math said. But 6 seconds stretched into eternity when the entire weight of your future hung on it. Sarah kept her cheek pressed to the stock, her breathing arrested in that fragile pause. She didn't blink, didn't flinch. The scope trembled faintly with the rhythm of her pulse, but her focus stayed locked on the speck that was supposed to be a target. And then nothing, just silence. Leaned closer to his spotting scope. His face gave nothing away, his jaw tight, eyes narrowing against the morning haze. Sarah waited, heart hammering. She wanted to ask, to know, but discipline held her tongue. A sniper doesn't break silence for comfort. Finally, his voice came, steady, controlled. Low left, you're in the zone. For anyone else that would have been enough. 5,000 meters. A shot within the acceptable area was already an achievement, but Sarah felt her chest sink. It wasn't the center. It wasn't perfect. Looked at her, and for a moment she thought she saw the faintest crack in his composure. Not disappointment, something else. Interest. You've got more in you. Adjust and send again. The wind was shifting. She saw it in the grass, the subtle lean, the rising shimmer as the sun pushed fog back into the valley. She recalculated, elevated 2 clicks, corrected for the push of crosswind that whispered across her cheek. The others were watching now, candidates who had already shot, instructors who had drifted up the hill curious about the rookie who refused to fold under pressure. She felt their eyes, their doubts, their curiosity. But when she laid her cheek back against the stock, the world shrank. It was just her, the rifle, and the line of math that connected her breath to a speck on a distant hillside. She exhaled, waited for the stillness between beats, and squeezed. The crack split the air, the recoil pressed into her shoulder, and again eternity stretched as the bullet carved invisible distance. Scope tracked it, eyes sharp. When impact came, his breath caught before his voice followed. Center nearly perfect. For a moment the world tilted. Sarah didn't believe it. She pulled back from her scope, blinking hard as if her own vision had betrayed her, but was still staring through his lens, a rare flicker of awe touching his features. The murmurs behind her rose. Candidates who had scoffed now leaned forward, straining to see what had just happened. Veterans who had dismissed her folded arms across their chests, eyes narrowing. Lowered his scope and looked at her. One more. Her palms were damp now. The weight was different. The first shot had been about proving she could. The second about proving it wasn't luck. The third, it was legacy. She wiped her hands against her fatigues, slow and deliberate, adjusted again. This time the wind was stable. The valley shimmered steady. No tricks. The stock felt warm against her skin, alive with memory. She inhaled, exhaled, let her body settle. The rifle became an extension of her bones, her breath, her pulse. When the shot broke, it surprised even her. Smooth, clean. The crowd behind her seemed to hold its breath. His voice didn't come right away. He was silent, tracking, following the arc, the invisible path across 3 miles of air. And then, at last, closer, deadly close. You just made history, Mitchell. Applause broke out, spontaneous, not forced, the sound of disbelief turning into respect. Sarah stayed still, cheek against the stock, her chest rising and falling fast. It wasn't joy she felt. Not yet, it was something heavier. Relief, maybe. Vindication. The months of whispers, the side glances, the doubts, all of them burned away in that single moment. She pulled back slowly, finally allowing herself to breathe. Stood tucking his clipboard under one arm, his eyes locked on hers. I've trained hundreds, maybe thousands, but I've never seen that. He didn't smile, but the weight in his voice carried something more valuable than praise, respect. The others moved in. For months they had ignored her, mocked her, left her standing alone at chow tables. Now, one by one, they came closer, not with words at first, just with nods, with the way they looked at her rifle, then at her and back again. She had earned something rare, something even the best struggled for, not approval, not acceptance, something deeper, reverence. That night, lying in her bunk, Sarah stared at the ceiling again. Only this time the doubt didn't come. In its place was a different kind of weight, expectation. She knew the shot wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of a new one. And beginnings were always heavier. 3 months later, she found herself in a helicopter, the rotors thundering above her head, the smell of diesel and sweat thick in the air. This wasn't training anymore. This was deployment. Her rifle lay across her lap. Not the M24 from training, but a customized long-range system designed for mountains and impossible distances. Her team was small, an elite unit pulled from across the branches. They had been skeptical when she arrived, the rookie with the long shot. Stories had spread faster than truth. Some said she'd hit a bullseye at 5,000 meters. Others said she'd split a playing card in half. Myths, legends. She ignored them. The mountains rose beneath them, jagged and merciless. Somewhere in those ridges, enemy fighters were moving. The team needed overwatch. Sarah was the overwatch. One of the men leaned across the helicopter, shouting over the noise. "Hey, rookie, you really as good as they say?" She didn't answer. She just checked her scope, adjusted her dope chart, and closed her eyes for a moment, feeling her breath steady. It was easier that way. Let the rifle speak. When they landed, dust rising around them, the mission began. The terrain was cruel. High altitude, thin air, shifting winds. Conditions most snipers avoided, but this was exactly why they had brought her. Hours later, hidden in a rocky outcrop, Sarah pressed her body against the earth, scope trained on a nearly 2 kilometers away. Her team moved below, small figures against an unforgiving landscape. The enemy was out there, waiting, watching. And Sarah was waiting too. Patience was her weapon. Through her scope she saw a flicker of movement, the shimmer of a rifle barrel catching sunlight. Her team hadn't seen it. They were exposed. Her finger rested on the trigger, breath slowing, heart steadying. She had one shot. And what came next would prove whether the legend was myth or truth. The crosshairs wavered just slightly, the magnification amplifying the tremor of her own heartbeat. Sarah exhaled, steadying, letting her body sink into the earth until she and the rifle felt fused into one shape, one purpose. Below, her team moved along the ridge, unaware of the danger glinting ahead. They were in the kill zone, though they didn't know it. Sarah knew. She read the wind, a subtle push left to right. Thin air, high elevation, sharper drift. She adjusted. The shimmer of the barrel in her scope confirmed her fear. A sniper waiting, patient like her, hunting. Her finger pressed the trigger. Smooth, deliberate, the way months of repetition had carved into muscle memory. The shot broke. The recoil pressed her shoulder, and silence swallowed her heartbeat. 3 seconds later, the target folded, a lifeless silhouette tumbling against the rocks. The enemy sniper never fired a shot. Sarah's team froze, heads snapping upward, then scanning across the. They hadn't even seen him. They hadn't known how close death had come, but Sarah had. The radio crackled in her ear. Target neutralized, good eyes, good shot. She didn't answer. She kept her scope scanning, body still pressed flat to the earth, but deep inside something shifted. For months she had trained in theory, shooting paper, steel, distant specks on a hillside. Now the shot was real. The man in her crosshairs had been alive, waiting for his moment. She had ended that moment before it began. It wasn't triumph she felt, it was gravity. The weight of her choice pressed down, heavier than her rifle ever had. When the team regrouped hours later, dust and sweat clinging to every crease in their uniforms, the mood had changed. The same men who had doubted her, teased her, dismissed her, now looked at her differently. Not with laughter, not with skepticism, with something closer to quiet relief. Respect wrapped in silence. One of them broke it, muttering, "Guess the legend wasn't all hot air." She didn't respond. She just cleaned her rifle, her hands moving with practiced calm. But inside, the question lingered. If the legend was true, what would it cost her to keep proving it? That night, alone in her small tent, Sarah pulled out a folded piece of paper from her pack. Her grandfather's last letter, the one he'd sent after hearing of her qualification shots. "Always knew you had it in you, Sarah. Your grandmother would be proud." The words steadied her, but they also made her ache. He would never know what it felt like to pull the trigger on a human life. Never know how the echoes of that shot followed you into the dark. The missions kept coming. Mountain passes, Remote villages, cold valleys where the wind howled so hard it made breathing feel like labor. Sarah became the silent shield, the unseen presence that watched over her unit from distances so vast the enemy never realized they were already marked. Each shot saved lives, each shot took one. And with each the weight grew. Had once told them during training, the hardest part isn't pulling the trigger, it's living with the silence after. At the time she hadn't understood, now she did. Her teammates leaned on her more with every mission. Their trust grew absolute. They walked into fire knowing she was above them, unseen, ready. But trust came with expectation. Expectation came with pressure. And pressure, unchecked, could break even the strongest. One mission etched itself into her memory. They had been tasked with overwatch for a convoy moving through a narrow valley. Intelligence suggested ambush, and intelligence was right. Within minutes, fire erupted from the ridges. Bullets tore into vehicles, explosions cracked the silence. Chaos reigned. Sarah was already in position high above, her scope sweeping the. She spotted muzzle flashes, adjusted, fired. Targets dropped, one after another, her rifle barking in steady rhythm. Her corrections came instinctively now, wind, range, drift, all processed faster than thought. But then, something she hadn't expected. A child, no older than 12, skinny arms straining to lift a battered rifle, half hidden behind rocks, fear and defiance in his eyes. He was aiming down at the convoy, aiming at her team. Sarah froze. Her breath caught, finger trembling on the trigger. In her scope, the boy's hands shook violently as he struggled to steady the weapon. She knew what would happen if she waited. He would fire. He could kill someone, one of hers. Her chest tightened. The calculations, the science, the training, none of it mattered here. This wasn't numbers. This was something far messier. Her radio crackled. "Shooter left ridge, do you see him?" She closed her eyes for half a second, long enough to hear her grandfather's voice in memory. "Trust your instincts." Her instincts screamed both ways. The boy's rifle tilted downward, toward the convoy. Sarah's trigger broke. The silence that followed was the heaviest she had ever known. Later, her team would call it a clean save. They would tell her she had no choice. They would remind her that hesitation could have killed them all. But Sarah didn't feel saved. She felt hollow. That night she sat apart from the others, cleaning her rifle under the stars. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the bolt. One of the men approached, kneeling beside her. He didn't speak, just sat there for a while, the silence between them saying everything words couldn't. Eventually, he placed a hand on her shoulder and walked away. She cleaned in silence until dawn. From then on, something in her changed. She grew colder in the field, more precise, more detached. It wasn't numbness, not exactly. It was survival. If she let herself feel every shot, she would break. If she let herself question every pull of the trigger, she would hesitate. And hesitation killed. Still, in the rare quiet moments, the doubt returned. She kept her grandfather's letter close, folding and unfolding it until the creases wore thin. It was her anchor, her reminder that she wasn't just the legend people whispered about. She was Sarah, a girl from Montana who once spent hours in a field with a Winchester, waiting for deer that never came. But that girl felt further away every day. And one night, lying awake in her cot, Sarah wondered if the distance between who she had been and who she was becoming could ever be closed. Because deep down she knew the truth. The shot that made her a legend hadn't been at 5,000 meters. It had been the one she never wanted to take. And the silence afterward would follow her for the rest of her life. How much silence could one person carry? Sarah asked herself that question more and more often. In the field she was precise, reliable, lethal. But off the field, in the rare hours between missions, the silence followed her like a shadow. It clung to her chest, pressed behind her eyes, stole sleep from her nights. The others didn't see it. To them she was steady, the sniper who never missed. the quiet one whose trigger finger had saved them time and again. They didn't ask what it cost her. Maybe they didn't want to know. But Sarah knew. The boy's face lingered, not in nightmares, in moments of stillness. When she looked through her scope and saw nothing but terrain, she saw him there. Fragile arms lifting a weapon too heavy, eyes filled with fear that had turned into something else, determination. She could still hear the silence that came after that shot, as though the world itself had paused to witness what she had done. Words returned to her in fragments. The hardest part isn't pulling the trigger, it's living with the silence after. He had been right, and she was still learning how to live. The missions piled on: Overwatch for raids, extraction support, target elimination. Each operation carried its own weight, its own mark etched into her, but the expectations never stopped growing. Her reputation had become armor for the team. They walked into chaos with unspoken faith that she would keep them alive. Faith was heavy when it rested on your shoulders. One mission, the weight nearly crushed her. It was a dawn patrol through a mountain village known for shifting allegiances. Some supported coalition forces, others quietly armed fighters. No one could tell the difference at first glance. Sarah was perched above the village, her scope sweeping rooftops and alleyways as the team moved cautiously through narrow streets. Her position gave her clarity, angles, distances, potential threats, but clarity could also reveal impossible choices. Movement caught her eye, a rooftop 2 buildings ahead, a figure crouched low, a glint of metal in his hands. She zoomed in, a rifle, already shouldered, her heart spiked. The barrel was aimed directly at her team's point man. She adjusted, finger sliding into position on the trigger, breathed, steadied. But in the same heartbeat, something else shifted in her scope. Another figure, a woman, thin frame, dark scarf trailing in the wind. She had stepped between Sarah and the shooter, moving across the rooftop as if she had no idea what was unfolding behind her. The shooter hesitated, his barrel lowering just enough. He was waiting for her to move. Sarah froze. Her mind split in 2 directions. If she fired now, she risked hitting the woman. If she waited, her teammate could die. Seconds stretched, her finger trembled on the trigger. The radio hissed, "Mitchell, talk to me, what do you see?" Her throat locked, words wouldn't come. The shooter adjusted, shifting to the side of the woman. The rifle tilted downward again, towards Sarah's team. Her breath stuck. Then a crack, not hers. A teammate below had spotted the glint at the last second and fired. The enemy dropped, rifle clattering against the rooftop. The woman screamed and fell to the ground, hands over her head, dust rising around her. Sarah's own rifle stayed silent. She had hesitated. Later, when the team regrouped, no one said anything. The point man clapped her on the shoulder with a grin, relief etched across his sweat-streaked face. "Guess we're all still here. Thanks for the eyes, Mitchell." But Sarah knew the truth. She hadn't pulled the trigger, not when it counted. That night she sat apart from the others again, rifle across her lap, hands trembling as she broke it down piece by piece. She told herself it was discipline, being methodical, precise. But she knew it was penance. She replayed the moment over and over in her head. The woman's scarf lifting in the wind, the shooter's shifting aim, the sound of the other rifle firing, saving the team. And beneath it all, the question, what if next time there wasn't someone else to fire? Her confidence began to erode in small, invisible ways. She still made her shots, still read the wind, calculated drift, adjusted elevation. But inside, the certainty was cracking. Doubt whispered in every pause. During training, doubt had been an enemy she fought with numbers, with calculation, with repetition. Now it was different. Now doubt had a face, a voice, a silence that refused to leave her. Her grandfather's letter remained folded in her pack, edges worn thin from her constant touch. She read it again and again. "Always knew you had it in you. But what did it mean? The skill, the resolve, the burden." She wanted to believe he would still be proud, but sometimes she wasn't sure. His name came up in a report weeks later. He'd been promoted, pulled back into training command. He sent her a short note through channels. "Your performance speaks louder than anything I could write. Stay steady. Stay true." She stared at the words for a long time, then folded them into the same pocket as her grandfather's letter. Two voices, one from her past, one from her present, both telling her to trust herself. But trust was slipping. The next mission nearly shattered it completely. The team had been tasked with securing a remote pass cutting off supply lines. Sarah set up in a rocky outcrop, her scope tracing winding roads that snaked through the mountains. Hours passed, wind shifted, shadows stretched, and then movement. A truck, old, rusted, too heavy with cargo to belong to villagers. She tracked it, waiting. The door opened. Armed men stepped out, rifles slung casually. Fighters, no doubt. She adjusted, preparing her shot. But then from the back of the truck, smaller figures emerged. Children, barefoot, carrying crates, stumbling under the weight, forced labor, human shields. Her stomach twisted. One fighter pointed toward the valley, barking orders. The children followed, struggling under the crates. Her team was moving into that very valley. If she fired, the fighters would use the children as cover. If she didn't, her team would walk into danger. Her breath came sharp, hands slick against the rifle. "Mitchell status," the radio hissed. She couldn't answer. Her finger hovered over the trigger, trembling. The shot didn't come. Instead, she relayed positions, coordinates. She told them what she saw, told them to hold back. It bought time, bought safety, but it also revealed something darker. Her team succeeded that day, flanking, ambushing, driving the fighters back without casualties. They praised her afterward for the intel, said her discipline had saved them from a trap. But Sarah knew. She hadn't fired, not when she could have, not when she was expected to. That night the silence was unbearable. She lay in her cot, rifle beside her, staring at the canvas ceiling as if it held answers. Her chest felt tight, her breath shallow. The legend she had built, the rookie who could hit 5,000 meters, the sniper who saved her team again and again, felt like a mask slipping off. Underneath was something fragile. She began to wonder if the silence wasn't just following her. Maybe it was consuming her. And in that fragile space, a dangerous question took root. If the silence was too heavy to carry, how long before she broke under it? What happens when the legend falters? The question gnawed at Sarah more than any enemy ever had. Outwardly, she was still the sniper her team trusted, the one whose rifle drew invisible lines of safety across every battlefield. Inwardly, she knew cracks were spreading. Hesitation had crept in. The silence after every shot had grown heavier, darker, harder to carry. But the world didn't stop for her to figure it out. The mission orders came down sudden and sharp. Intercept a high-value target moving through a mountain corridor. Time-sensitive. High stakes. Too many lives at risk if they failed. Sarah said nothing as the plan unfolded around the map table. Her teammates leaned in, pointing, strategizing. They spoke with the easy confidence that came from believing she'd cover them. She felt their trust like a hand pressed against her back, pushing her forward, whether she wanted to move or not. At dawn they moved. The valley was narrow, its walls rising like jagged teeth on either side. Snow clung to shaded ledges, melting in thin rivulets that dripped onto stone. The wind was sharp, cutting through layers of gear, biting at skin. Sarah climbed alone to her perch, higher than the rest, where she could see everything and nothing at once. Her rifle settled on its bipod. She scanned through the scope, adjusting for glare, for distance, for the thin mountain air that twisted bullets off course if you underestimated it. She worked the math like breathing, automatic, precise. And then movement. A convoy, 3 vehicles crawling along the rocky track below. She zoomed in. Armed escorts clung to the sides. In the middle vehicle, through tinted glass, the silhouette of their target, a man whose orders had already cost countless lives. Her radio whispered, "Mitchell, eyes on." She clicked once, affirmative. The team maneuvered closer on the ground, positioning for ambush. Sarah's role was simple: eliminate the escorts, trap the convoy, take out the target if he bolted. But nothing was ever simple anymore. Her crosshairs landed on the first escort, a man with a heavy machine gun mounted to the lead vehicle. His hands gripped the handles casually, unaware he was already marked. One breath, one squeeze, she could end him. She hesitated, not because she doubted the shot, because she doubted herself. The weight of all the shots before pressed down: the boy, the woman, the children carrying crates. Every life she had taken, every silence she had swallowed. Her finger hovered, trembled. "Mitchell, take the shot." Her chest tightened. Still, she didn't fire. The convoy slowed. The lead escort scanned the ridges, suspicion creeping into his movements. Seconds were slipping away. Mitchell shot now. Her breath came sharp, her fingers squeezed. The crack split the valley, the escort dropped. But it was already too late. The convoy lurched, doors flung open. Fighters spilled into the rocks, scrambling for cover. Bullets erupted, ricocheting off stone, tearing into the air. Her team shouted into comms, caught in the open, pinned down before they could finish setting the trap. Sarah's scope swept, hunting targets, firing, adjusting. 2 fell, 3, but there were too many. The initial moment of surprise was gone because she had given it away. Her hands shook as she reloaded, as screams filled her headset. "We're pinned. We need cover, Mitchell." She tried. God, she tried. But every shot felt heavier than the last. Every pull of the trigger dragged against the weight of hesitation that had already cost them. A blast rocked the valley. One of the vehicles ignited, black smoke curling upward. She saw one of her teammates thrown to the ground, unmoving. Her heart lurched. The target escaped, slipped out of the chaos, pulled away by surviving escorts, vanishing into the mountain passes. The firefight dragged on until air support roared overhead, driving the enemy back. The valley fell silent again, but it was not the silence of victory. It was the silence of loss. When Sarah climbed down to rejoin the others, every step felt like stone tied to her boots. The smell of smoke and blood hung in the air. The wounded were being carried out. The dead were already still. Her team looked at her differently now, not with respect, not with doubt, with something worse, with quiet, unspoken questions. She couldn't meet their eyes. That night she sat apart as always, but this time no one approached. No one offered a hand on her shoulder or a word of reassurance. The distance between her and them had grown wide, and she felt it like a wound. Her rifle lay in her lap, pieces spread across a cloth, but for the first time she didn't clean it. Her hands just rested there, motionless. She thought of her grandfather's words, "Trust your instincts." But what if her instincts had failed? What if hesitation was her new instinct? His voice came back too. "Stay steady, stay true." But what if she wasn't steady anymore? What if she was breaking? Her hands curled into fists. The silence pressed in, louder than the firefight had ever been. In the days that followed, she waited for reassignment, waited for the fallout. It never came as punishment. It came as something worse. Doubt etched into the faces of men who had once trusted her without question. She overheard them sometimes, quiet voices when they thought she wasn't near. "She's not the same. Too much in her head. Can't rely on hesitation out there." Each word carved deeper. And yet in the middle of that doubt, something inside her refused to collapse. Because she remembered another lesson. From long before the training compound, before the legend. From Montana fields waiting for deer. Her grandfather's quiet patience as he'd whispered to her, "Every shot matters, Sarah. But so does every pause. Sometimes not pulling the trigger is its own kind of strength. She clung to that, but strength felt thin when her team no longer believed. The breaking point came when command pulled her aside. A senior officer, sharp eyes, voice clipped. "Mitchell, your record speaks for itself, but your performance on the last operation," a pause, a heavy look. "Some of your team are questioning your judgment. That can't happen, not in this line of work." She stood silent, chin high, heart sinking. The officer leaned forward. "You've got two choices. Recommit, prove you're still who they think you are, or step back, because hesitation gets people killed." His words cut, not because they weren't true, but because she already knew them. That night, alone again, she unfolded her grandfather's letter. The paper was thin now, edges frayed. She traced the words with her thumb until they blurred. "Always knew you had it in you." But what was it? Skill, will, or the burden of never being free from the silence afterward? She closed her eyes. And for the first time, Sarah admitted to herself the truth she had avoided for too long. She wasn't afraid of missing. She was afraid of becoming exactly what everyone believed her to be, a weapon, nothing more. The silence after every shot wasn't just haunting her, it was warning her. And if she didn't learn how to live with it, to live beyond it, then one day it would break her for good. How do you rebuild trust when even you don't trust yourself? Sarah asked that question every morning when she laced her boots. The silence after the failed mission still clung to her like smoke. Her teammates didn't avoid her outright, but something had shifted. Jokes at breakfast stopped short when she sat down. Conversations fell quiet when she walked into the tent. No one said it directly, but she felt the words anyway. She hesitated. "She cost us." The wound wasn't just theirs, it was hers. Every time she cleaned her rifle, her hands paused on the bolt, remembering the second she hadn't pulled. Every time she lifted her scope, her chest tightened, remembering the trust that had slipped away with one delay. But somewhere under the doubt, something stubborn remained, a spark. One evening, she unfolded her grandfather's letter again. The paper was worn nearly translucent, creases like veins running through it. She whispered the words aloud, voice barely audible. "Always knew you had it in you, Sarah." Her throat tightened. "Then why do I feel like I do?" The tent gave no answer, just silence. But silence, she realized, wasn't only punishment, it was space. And in that space, she began to rebuild. She started small, training by herself at dawn before the others woke, running the ridges until her lungs burned in the thin air, dry-firing her rifle in endless repetition, focusing not on the shot, but on the pause before it, the space where hesitation lived. She meditated on it, practiced breathing not to silence doubt, but to hear it clearly, to face it without flinching. If hesitation was her enemy, she would study it. If silence was her weight, she would learn to carry it. And slowly something shifted. Her teammates noticed it first, not in the field, but in the camp. She began offering small words at the map table, observations about terrain, about wind corridors, about timing, details they hadn't seen. She spoke softly, without arrogance, but when her insights proved right, even skeptics leaned closer. Trust didn't return overnight, but the spark grew. Then came the mission that would test whether the spark could hold. The orders were brutal. Protect a village known for aiding coalition forces under imminent threat of attack. Intel suggested dozens of fighters moving in from the hills, planning to burn homes, punish civilians, crush morale. The village was defenseless, its people farmers and shepherds. Sarah's team set up perimeter positions. Sarah climbed higher, settling into an outcrop overlooking the valley. Through her scope, she saw the village spread below, clay houses, narrow paths, smoke curling from cooking fires. Children chased goats through the dust. Women carried water jugs on their heads. It looked so ordinary, too ordinary. Her radio crackled, "Movement East Ridge." She swung her scope. Fighters, dozens, emerging like shadows from the rocks. armed, organized, moving toward the village with purpose. Her chest tightened. She adjusted her scope, marking ranges, calculating drift. This wasn't a single shot. This was a storm. The first fighters crested a ridge, rifles raised. She squeezed the trigger, the crack echoed. One dropped, she shifted, fired again. Another fell. The others scattered, shouts carrying across the valley. Her team opened fire from the perimeter, controlled bursts. Civilians screamed, rushing for cover. Dust rose in frantic swirls. Sarah's scope became her entire world. Every breath, every squeeze, every calculation. She tracked fighters through alleys, over rooftops, across open ground. Her rifle barked, steady, relentless. But then, the moment that tested her. A fighter kicked in the door of a house, dragging a young boy out by the arm. The boy couldn't have been more than 10. The fighter pressed a rifle barrel to the child's head, shouting at villagers nearby, using the boy as a shield. Sarah's finger froze. Her chest seized with memory, the child's soldier, the hesitation that had haunted her, the silence afterward. She heard her team shouting in comms, "Sniper, take him, take the shot." Her breath caught, doubt screamed, what if she missed? What if she hit the boy? Her hands trembled. And then clarity. She remembered her grandfather in the Montana fields. "Don't rush, Sarah, but don't hide either. Trust what you see." She saw it now, the angle of the fighter's stance, the narrow slice of exposed shoulder, the wind's soft push, the boy's terrified stillness. Her doubts didn't vanish, but she didn't need them to. She only needed to act with them. She breathed, paused, squeezed. The shot cracked, the fighter collapsed. The boy stumbled free, scrambling back toward the villagers. Sarah exhaled, her body shaking, not from relief, from the weight. But she didn't break, not this time. The battle raged on, but her focus sharpened. She fired, adjusted, fired again. Fighters fell one after another until the survivors broke and fled into the hills. When the dust settled, the village still stood. Smoke curled from bullet walls, but the homes were intact. The people were alive. Her team regrouped, weary but breathing. They looked at her differently now, not as the legend she once was, not as the hesitation that had cost them, something steadier, something human. One of them, the same man who had once questioned her most, clapped her on the shoulder. "You saved that kid, and probably all of us." She nodded but didn't answer. Words weren't needed. That night she cleaned her rifle under the stars. Her hands still trembled, but not from weakness. From everything it meant to carry the silence and still act. She unfolded her grandfather's letter again, the edges now close to disintegrating. She traced the words one last time. "Always knew you had it in you." She whispered back, voice breaking but steady, "I think I finally know what you meant." Because it wasn't perfection, it wasn't legend. It was the strength to carry silence and still pull the trigger when it mattered. How does a legend grow? Not in the moment of the shot, not in the cheer or the silence that follows. Legends grow afterward, in the retelling, in the whispers that spread, in the way others begin to believe in something larger than the truth. Sarah never asked for that, but it happened anyway. Word of the village defense spread quickly. The boy saved. The fighters repelled. Her name carried across bases, across units. Some said she was ice, a sniper who never flinched. Others painted her as something mythic, part human, part scope, part silence. The truth was quieter. She wasn't unshakable. She wasn't myth. She was a woman who trembled at night, who carried letters from the dead and the living in the same pocket, who whispered to herself that hesitation didn't have to be weakness. But no one saw that part. They only saw the legend. And with legend came responsibility. New recruits arrived, young, sharp-eyed, eager. Among them were women who looked at her with something different in their gaze. Not doubt, not dismissal, hope. For the first time, Sarah saw herself reflected in others. The way she had once walked into his compound, carrying her grandfather's lessons and everyone else's skepticism. She found herself pulled into mentorship without meaning to. A quiet correction at the range, a soft word about breathing, a reminder that stillness wasn't absence but control. The recruits leaned in. They listened. They trusted her even when she barely trusted herself. His voice came back to her often. Stay steady, stay true. She tried to pass that on. But she also added something of her own. Don't be afraid of the pause, she told one nervous recruit who kept rushing her trigger pull. The pause isn't weakness. It's where you decide who you are. The recruit nodded, eyes wide. Sarah saw the seed take root, and in that moment she realized her silence could teach too. Her team shifted toward her again, slowly, steadily, not as blind faith, not as unshakable legend, as something more real, a teammate, a presence they could count on, not because she was flawless but because she was human and still chose to stand with them. But the war didn't care about lessons or redemption arcs. The war just kept going. Orders came for a mission that carried the weight of strategy, not just survival. Intelligence had pinpointed a meeting of high-ranking insurgent leaders in a remote compound. Taking them out could fracture enemy coordination across the region. Missing them could cost months, maybe years of progress. Sarah's team was chosen for overwatch and support. She studied the maps late into the night. Distances, angles, escape routes. The compound was tucked into a ravine, fortified but not untouchable. Her perch would be high, nearly 2 kilometers out, a long shot but within reach. Still, unease gnawed at her. Not because of the distance, not because of the target, but because she knew what missions like this demanded. Absolute precision, absolute certainty, and certainty had never been her companion. At dawn they moved. The climb was brutal, frost crunching under boots, wind slicing across their faces. Sarah carried her rifle close, the weight both comfort and burden. Her perch overlooked the ravine. Through her scope she saw the compound, mud walls, a watchtower, guards packing with rifles slung, and then movement inside, men gathering, leaders, decision-makers, targets. Her radio whispered, "Mitchell, you're green when ready." She scanned, calculated, adjusted. But something pulled at her, a flicker, a shadow, the smallest movement in the periphery of her scope. She adjusted, heart sinking. Children, 2 of them, carrying water jugs across the compound, barefoot in the dirt. Her chest tightened. The ghosts returned, the boy with the rifle, the boy dragged by the fighter. The silence after each shot pressing against her ribs. Her finger hovered on the trigger. She radioed softly, "Civilians in the compound." The silence that followed told her everything. The team knew, command knew, everyone always knew, but the mission came first. Her radio hissed, "You have clearance, leaders are priority." Sarah closed her eyes for a heartbeat. She had been here before, torn between mission and conscience, between silence and the shot. But this time was different. She wasn't the rookie anymore. She wasn't the legend weighed down by perfection. She was someone who had lived through hesitation, who had carried silence, who had learned what it meant to choose. She opened her eyes. The leaders stepped into view, gathering near a table in the open courtyard. Easy targets, clean line of sight. The children lingered nearby, setting their water jugs down. Her breath steadied. She whispered to herself, "Don't erase the pause, live in it." She adjusted, waiting for the children to move. Seconds stretched. Her teammates' voices pressed in, urgent. "Mitchell, now, take the shot, do it." But she didn't rush. She watched, waited. The pause was agony, but it was also clarity. The children finally turned, walking away from the courtyard, out of line. Sarah's breath emptied, her finger pressed, the rifle cracked. One leader dropped, then another. Panic spread in the compound. Her rifle spoke again, precise, relentless. Within minutes, the courtyard was chaos, fighters scattering, leaders down. Her team stormed in, securing the compound, pushing through resistance. When the dust settled, the mission was done. Successful, clean, strategic. But Sarah didn't celebrate. She just lowered her rifle, shoulders trembling. Because she knew the truth. The success hadn't been in the shots she took. It had been in the moments she didn't, the pause that kept her human. Later, as they regrouped, one of her teammates grinned at her, shaking his head. "You're something else, Mitchell, cool as stone." She didn't correct him, didn't tell him she hadn't been cool at all, that her hands had trembled, that the pause had nearly broken her. She just nodded, silent as ever. But inside she carried a quiet truth. Strength wasn't about never hesitating. Strength was about living with the hesitation and still acting with dignity. That night, under a sky smeared with stars, Sarah sat with her recruits. They asked questions about wind, about distance, about fear. She answered softly, honestly. Fear doesn't go away, neither does doubt. What matters is what you do with it. One recruit asked, voice barely above a whisper, "But how do you know when to pull the trigger?" Sarah looked at her, eyes steady, voice low. "You don't, you decide, and then you live with the silence." The recruits fell quiet, listening. Sarah looked back at the stars, her rifle across her lap, and felt the weight of her own words. Because she knew her hardest test hadn't come yet. And when it did, it wouldn't measure her aim. It would measure who she had become in the silence. What happens when the silence is absolute? Sarah felt it the moment she opened her orders, a classified briefing, a mission without room for error, and at the bottom of the page, a name she recognized. High-value target, the architect of ambushes, bombings, assassinations, a man whose orders had written too many headstones. But Sarah also remembered another detail from intelligence reports. He never traveled without civilians around him. Human shields, insurance. Her chest tightened as she folded the page. She knew what this meant. The mission unfolded under moonlight. The team moved through jagged mountain passes, shadows pressed close to their skin. Sarah climbed higher, carrying her rifle, her pack, her silence. Her perch overlooked a crumbling village pressed against the mountainside. Through her scope, she saw them. Fighters packing with rifles, trucks idling in alleys, the target's compound glowing faintly under lantern light. And then she saw them. Civilians, families, children peeking from doorways, women carrying baskets, elders hunched in doorways. The compound wasn't just guarded, it was buried in life. Her radio whispered, "Mitchell, green when ready." Her scope found the target, sitting in the courtyard drinking tea, surrounded by people, surrounded by innocents. Her breath slowed. This was the shot everyone expected her to take, the one command had gambled the mission on, the one her team trusted her to deliver, the one that could end a chain of blood. And yet the silence pressed harder than ever. Because she knew if she pulled the trigger now, someone innocent might fall with him. The pause wasn't hesitation this time. It was conscience. Her radio hissed again, "Mitchell, do it now." Her finger hovered, trembled. And then she whispered into her comms, voice steady. "Negative, too many civilians. He's not leaving alive, but I'm not killing a child to do it." The line went quiet, a dangerous kind of silence. Her team leader hissed back, "Mitchell, this is the order." But Sarah had lived long enough with orders, lived long enough with silence, and she knew this was the moment that defined her, not the 5,000-meter shot, not the boy she'd once been forced to kill, not the village she'd defended. This. She lowered her scope. Her voice was calm. "I'll take him when he's clear. Until then, we wait." The team shifted below, tense, uncertain. Command would be furious. Careers could end over disobedience like this. But Sarah didn't flinch. She had carried too many ghosts to add another she didn't have to. Minutes stretched into hours. The compound bustled, fighters coming and going, civilians moving through narrow alleys. Sarah watched, patient, steady. The pause wasn't weakness. It was her choice. And then her moment. The target rose, stepping into the street, flanked by 2 guards. For once, no civilians surrounded him, just open air, just silence. Her breath emptied, her scope steadied. The trigger broke. The crack split the night, the target fell, the guards panicked, scanning shadows. Sarah fired again, clean, precise. Both dropped before they knew where death had come from. Her team stormed in, securing the compound. No civilians harmed, no collateral, mission complete. When it was over, Sarah stayed in her perch, cheek pressed to the stock, breathing steady. For the first time in months, the silence that followed didn't crush her. It lifted. Because she knew she had chosen the silence, owned it. Later, when reports were written, when her team debriefed, the story spread again. They called it patience. They called it nerves of steel. They called it another legend. Sarah didn't correct them. She didn't need to. Because the truth was simpler. It wasn't about steel nerves. It wasn't about perfection. It was about dignity. The kind that doesn't shout, doesn't boast, doesn't ask for recognition. The kind that waits, that pauses, that acts when it matters most. Weeks later, Sarah sat alone at the range, cleaning her rifle in the fading light. A recruit approached, young, nervous, clutching her own weapon like it might slip from her hands. "Sergeant Mitchell," the girl asked softly, "how do you know if you're ready, if you're good enough?" Sarah looked at her, saw herself years ago, farm girl, rookie, dismissed, doubted. She set the bolt aside and answered quietly, "You're never ready, you're never good enough. Not all the way, but you learn, you listen, you carry the silence, and when the moment comes, you act." The recruit nodded, eyes wide, and walked away carrying those words like a new kind of weapon. Sarah looked back down at her rifle, the fading light glinting off steel, and smiled faintly. Because she knew her story wasn't about the distance of her shots, or the records she broke, or the myths whispered about her name. It was about something quieter. Something she had carried all along, from Montana fields to mountain wars, from doubt to dignity. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.